Hi there, welcome to the channel or welcome back. My name is Angela and today I'm going to share with you guys one of my favorite recipes for making hot sauce. As my garden has kind of wound down for this year, there's nothing really going on out there. I am still using up some of the things that I harvested. Primarily what I have left are these hot peppers. So more about these peppers here in just a moment. The recipe that I'm going to share with you guys, it's my favorite recipe for making hot sauce. It's not my own recipe. It came from a website called chilipeppermadness.com. I think I'm getting that right. I'll put a link to that channel below. I've used this recipe a few times. It's just called, got my notes here, ghost pepper hot sauce. And I have, since I've made it a couple of times, I have changed it up a little bit from what the recipe exactly as it was written on the website. So I'm going to share with you guys how I make it with the changes that I've made. And once again, I'll link to the actual recipe and, crediting the source in the description box below. And the recipe itself, as written from the source, calls for 6 butjalakia or ghost peppers. When I've made it in the past, I've kind of mixed it up with a bunch of different peppers. I've used a combination of ghost, serrano, dragon toe, jalapeno, and I'm sure there's been other peppers. It's one of those, whatever is ripe and ready to harvest at the moment, that's kind of what goes into this recipe. Today, the only peppers that I have available, I have 7 of these Sugar Rush peach peppers. And when these are ripe, let me hold it up in front of my dirty dish towel here so you guys can see the color. They kind of mellow into a banana yellow, I guess, or maybe it's more of a peachy yellow, hence the name Sugar Rush Peach. But I have 7 of these. This plant I started from seed a couple of years ago. I actually overwintered it last year because it was so prolific. The seeds originally came from Baker Creek. I'll put a link to them below too. And because it did so well, I overwintered it last year. So when I put the plant back out in the garden outside this year in the spring, as soon as our first frost, there was last frost, as soon as there was no danger of frost and it was hot enough outside, I put the plant outside and it had kind of a head start because it was already, pretty sizable. And I have to say it did really well. So once again, I pulled the plant in. I've got it back in my laundry room over that way where it will get bright but diffuse light all through the winter. So I'm pretty sure as long as I keep it watered, the plant will stay alive. I'll put it back out in the spring and it'll have hopefully a little bit of a head start again. As far as how hot these are, they are a hot pepper. And these, once again, it was hard to find the exact Scoville units as far as the heat scale for these peppers. I read anywhere from 50,000 to 150,000 Scoville units. And for comparison, cayenne peppers run from 30,000 to 50,000. And habaneros run from 100,000 to 300,000. I think I read the scale was broad. And I guess it depends on how, maybe if there's varieties or where they're grown. I'm not sure why it's not more precise than that. This is all just what I've read. And then, of course, ghost peppers are averaging 1,000,000 Scovilles. So once again, these peppers run from 50,000 to 150,000. So hotter than a cayenne, not as hot as a habanero. If you're ready, let's get going on this recipe. So I've got pretty much everything prepped. I've already minced my garlic, chopped up my onions. The only thing I haven't done to prep is to chop up these peppers and de-seed them. That's because I wanted you guys to see what they look like. And I hope that that is going to show up close enough for you. They're a really pretty yellow color. So I'm going to get going on that now, and I might just kind of speed through this so as not to bore you guys. Let me grab a knife. I am not wearing gloves with these. Now, when I work with the really hot peppers, and truth be told, the only really hot pepper that I've ever grown and used is a ghost pepper, which is pretty hot. I did wear latex or nitrile gloves when working with those peppers just because it's so hot. I am going to be very sure that I wash my hands thoroughly after handling these, and also not to touch my face until I'm certain that my hands have no residue from these peppers. The recipe calls for 6 peppers. I'm going to go ahead and use 7 because looking at it, the recipe calls for 6 ghost peppers. These are not nearly as hot as a ghost, so I think using 7 will be just fine. I'm going to grab my compost bin to throw all the waste in here. And one other thing to note, normally, when I am cutting up peppers from my garden, what I like to do is to save seed. I use that as an opportunity to save seeds from that particular pepper. I know for a fact that I have a bunch of these seeds already. I still have some from the original packet, and I also have some that I saved last year. So I'm good with seeds on this. So I'm not going to save seeds from these. And there might be a better way to chop and de-seed these hot peppers. This is just the way that I know, so I'm doing it this way. And rest assured, for those of you who come here for the gardening content, I am not turning this into a cooking channel. Cooking is not my forte at all. I always joke that I cook because I need to eat. Also, I cook because I like to use the produce that came from my garden. But other than that, cooking's not really a hobby of mine, although in my younger years, I loved to cook. Now it's just kind of a matter of necessity. So I'm going to take these over to the sink and de-seed them. I'll be right back. So I've got these all de-seeded, and all I had done was just chop the ends off, make a slit down one side, kind of break them open gently, and then just use my thumb to kind of scrape out all the seeds and the membrane in there. And I don't know if hot peppers affect, oh, I've missed one. I'm going to have to take care of that. If working with hot peppers affects you guys, but as soon as I open one up and start messing with the inside of it, those I guess the capsaicin fumes or what have you, I breathe that in. Oh, it hits my throat and I start coughing like crazy. I'll be right back. And that is what happened to me when I did this with these peppers. So if I had any doubt as to whether these are hot peppers or not, that is kind of laid to rest now. So I'm going to go ahead and chop these. And as I always do when I'm working with these pretty hot peppers, it makes me wonder how the first people that lived where these types of peppers grow native, whatever made them think to taste one. And well, of course, they're beautiful and they look like fruit. So you would understand like what would make people grab one off of a plant and just take a bite out of it or taste it, that would then go on to make them think, oh, this is food. Because these peppers, gosh, they'll just like burn your mouth out, frankly. I'm going to wash my hands even though I am still working with the peppers. I've got a runny eye from dealing with the hot peppers, and I'm thinking now I probably should have worn gloves. These are hot enough that I should have worn gloves. So word to the wise. So now that the peppers are chopped, the next thing I'm going to do is to saute the peppers, the onions, and the garlic in just a little bit of olive oil. The original recipe did not call for garlic. I am using garlic. I think the first time I tried it, I just did the recipe as written, decided I wanted to add a little bit of garlic in. So I've got 2 cloves of garlic, which also came from the garden. The onions did not, because my onion harvest was very, very measly this year. Small onions and not very many of them. So I'm going to take my olive oil and go ahead and get the pan heating up. While that's heating up, the recipe does call for 2 medium tomatoes chopped. The first time I made this recipe, I used fresh tomatoes from the garden, but the only tomato I have at this time, the last tomato, is right here. It's this little cherry tomato. I'm saving that for a salad. So what I'm going to use is a can of tomatoes. I have made this recipe using canned diced tomatoes, and it turned out fine. What I'm trying this year, just to mix it up a little, are stewed tomatoes. Because they're seasoned, they have sugar, salt, dried onion, dried celery, dried bell pepper, and natural flavors, whatever that means. So I thought it might be fun just to give it a little bit of something different this time and see how that turns out. The great thing about recipes like hot sauce and salsa, even, you can mix it up however you want pretty much, and it'll almost always turn out pretty well. At least that's my experience. I'm going to open this can. We put in this butcher block earlier this year. Prior to that, we just had like a laminate countertop on the island here, and it was small. You can't see the island itself, the cabinetry, but it's not. It's runs from here to here. Hope that's showing up. And that's about how big the countertop was. When we took that off, we knew we wanted a butcher block, and we decided to enlarge it. So we made it overhang a little bit more on this end and on this front side here, or back side, however you think about it. So we really enlarged the surface area on the island just by adding, a few inches on 2 different dimensions there. It increased the square footage quite a bit, and it's been so wonderful to have the extra workspace. And we actually do use it as a butcher block. We cut veggies on it, do chopping on it, and we roll out pizza dough on it with the flour. The reason I'm not doing these hot peppers directly on it is because they're so hot, and I don't want that to get stuck into the butcher block. And we also don't chop, raw meat on this either. So it's been so good just to have this nice working surface. We have actually sanded it down more than once. Like, that's the great thing about it. Over time, as we use it, it might get stained, it might get scarred up. You just lightly sand it and oil it again, and you have like almost a brand new surface. It's so wonderful. And I'm waiting for, over the years, it's going to get that slightly wavy, just a little bit warped patina to it that makes it feel like an old world kind of work surface. Let me check this skillet. It feels like it's pretty hot. I'm going to go ahead and just put the oil in. All right. That was guessing about a tablespoon, maybe a little bit less. I'm going to let the oil heat up for just a moment. And everything's going to end up cooking in this skillet in the end, and then it'll get transferred over into the blender to blend it all up and make it smooth. It calls for doing that blending in a food processor. I do have a food processor, but it's tucked like way back, and it's hard to get to, and I'm lazy, so I use my Vitamix, which is I keep it very readily available because I use this for all kinds of stuff, and primarily smoothies. So I'm going to have to make sure I clean the hot pepper coating off of it really well before I use it for a smoothie. So I'm going to go ahead and take all of this over to the skillet here. Yeah, there's the sizzle, so I know it's hot. It calls for sauteing for 5 minutes, so I'm going to stick to that. And I'm going to set this timer. And as always, when there are sauteing onions happening, I can't help but think that is the very best aroma in the whole world. So that's what we've got going on here. I'll probably speed this up or just take a little break and come back to you guys once these are ready. So we've been sauteing for about 3 minutes, and because I didn't add enough oil, it's starting to dry out a little bit. I'm going to go ahead on to the next step. I feel like they've sauteed enough. The next step is to add the tomatoes and let that cook for 10 minutes. I'll give you a little peek of how it's looking here. And if I were using whole tomatoes, I would have chopped those up first. But since these are already pretty cut up, I think it was okay. I just put the whole can in like this. And then, of course, they'll get, blended up to smooth consistency once they go into the blender. But that's how we're looking now. And I've still got 6 minutes for this to cook. So I'm going to put you back up on your stand. And I'll catch up with you here in just a minute. Okay, time for the next step, which is adding the vinegar. It's red wine vinegar, salt, and water. The recipe calls for 2 tablespoons of red wine vinegar, and I have a note here that I had increased that to 3. I didn't add my note of why I decided to do that, but for some reason I did in years past, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. It might have been to cut down some of the heat. I have read that if you have a food that's really, really hot, you can use vinegar to help neutralize the heat. So I'm not a food scientist or a chef. That's just what I've read. So I'm thinking maybe I upped that because of that reason. Either way, I'm going to use the 3 and then 1 teaspoon of salt and start with a half cup of water. I might end up adding more water when it's time to blend it just to get it to the liquidy or the smooth consistency. So for now, we're going to do a half cup of water and 3 tablespoons of red wine vinegar. And 1 teaspoon of salt. Give that a good stirring. And thinking about it, the first time that I made this, I used the ghost peppers. It was pretty hot, so maybe that's the time at which I decided it needed more vinegar. And I had looked at my notes while I was waiting for this 10-minute tomato part to cook. And I actually did make this last year using only the Sugar Rush peach peppers, which what I'm using this year. But I have in my notes that I used 5 of those peppers and that it had a great, great flavor, but it wasn't really that hot. So I'm wondering, how it'll turn out this time with 7 of the peppers. And I'm okay if it doesn't turn out that hot. I think either way, I will end up with a good flavored sauce. I'm going to set my timer for 20 minutes. I think it's 20 minutes. Yeah, we're going to simmer for 20 minutes. And then I'm going to put it on pause right now and I'll check back in with you. I'll give you a peek at what it's doing over here. I know you guys are so far away from the stove where I had you perched. So this is what it's looking like. And we have 18 minutes left on our timer. And once this is done, we'll be ready to, or once the 18 minutes are up, we'll go ahead and get it blended up. I'm going to show you my secret little stash of bottles and jars. Oh yeah, and by the way, I can show you the island here. So it's a really small island. Our house is not that big. It's, you know, it's on the smaller side, so we just have this little island here in our kitchen. But what we did was to extend it. Previously, the countertop was just out maybe a couple inches overhang on the island, so we took it all the way out to here. And then similarly on, sorry about the shaky camera, similarly on this side we extended it out. I forget, maybe 4 inches or something like that. This is kind of where our junk drawers are. And it is a little bit harder to reach back in there to get things, but to me that's a small trade-off to pay for having a much bigger workspace. So where I have my little secret stash of jars is over here in the corner. We have this little two-layer like Lazy Susan type of thing. And anytime I buy something that comes in a jar, like that's food safe, and I think the jar is a great size or shape, I clean it out and I stick it in here. For instance, this old maple syrup jar I thought was so pretty. The glass is kind of textured and it's a nice size, so I might end up using that for this hot sauce or some of it. And here's another jar. Some of them are larger, but I've got like this whole stash of jars in here. I've got my half-gallon ball jar that I use when I make fire cider. And these are actually old jars of Frank's hot sauce. So I might use this for this hot sauce. And it'll be especially good because it still has the lid. So you can just drop it out one drop at a time. I'm going to keep that out. I think I'm going to use that first. And if I fill all that up, then I'll look for a secondary jar. But that's where I stash just about anything that doesn't have like a proper place. Goes right in that Lazy Susan corner cabinet. So we're still looking at 15 minutes over here on our hot sauce, stirring it occasionally. And I don't know if this is too much of a simmer. Might turn the heat down just a little bit. I'm not sure that it matters, but turn it down just a little. So I'm going to put you back on your perch and I'll catch up with you in 14.5 minutes. Okay, we're ready to blend it and bottle it. Let's do this. And as it was cooking, it kind of thickened up a little bit, so I'm pretty sure I'm going to need to add some water to it. So I've got about a cup, maybe a little bit less than a cup here. And I'm going to go ahead and scoop it into my blender container. I'm doing this with a ladle because I can't hold this. This pan is so heavy, I can't hold it with one hand and scoop with the other. So we're just going to cheat a little bit here and use the ladle. And actually, let's just do it like this. And it kind of shrunk down a little, and it doesn't look like there's a great quantity here. But I'll get enough to last me for a little while. Maybe not a full year, but... And depending on how hot this turns out, I can see using this on vegetables, potatoes, like any kind of savory dish that otherwise doesn't have a lot of flavor to it or doesn't have its own sauce, I can see using this as a nice little condiment. That's what I'm looking for. So I'm pretty sure it's thick, so I'm going to go ahead and just add about half a cup of water and see what we get. And I do have in my notes where I've had to add extra water to it at this point. All right, let's take a look. So it's kind of thick. Let me bring this in closer for you guys to see. I think I'm going to add a little bit more water and blend it up just to get a more liquid consistency. It's almost pureed consistency. Maybe that's how I would describe it. I'm just going to add maybe 1/4 of a cup. I'm afraid to liquefy it too much. I do have in my notes too where I've had to add water to the point where it was simmering for those 20 minutes because it was just getting too dried out, too thick. So it's all different. Just because I change up the recipe every time, it's a little different. All right, let's check it now. It's definitely smoother and runnier. It's not quite the consistency as, say, a Frank's sauce. We use a lot of Frank's hot sauce in this household, so I'm very familiar with that, the smoothness and just the runniness of it. And I'm not sure that this would ever be like that or that I'm trying to get it like that. It's just kind of like a baseline that I have in my mind. That's good. It is good. So do I want to, you guys see that? Do I want to, I don't think I want to add more water to it. I think I'm going to be fine with it as is. So let me grab my bottle and got my funnel here. There's still some in the lid. Not much though. I want every last bit of it. These are my last peppers of the garden this year. I want to maximize it. So I'm going to bring this over a little closer. And once it's in the bottle, I'll bring it up closer to you guys so you can see how it turned out. And I probably at this point can just pour it in. Okay. Cap it. Make sure that's good and tight. I'll bring this a little closer so you guys can see it. Yeah, it's still got some thickness to it, but it's definitely fluid. It's definitely liquidy. And what I'm going to do now, kind of just as a little taste test, I have some potatoes here that I keep a ready supply of cooked chopped potatoes in the fridge because I eat a lot of them. I'm going to try this. And potatoes are cold, of course. Maybe I should heat those up just for a minute. Yeah, I'm going to stick these in the microwave for 20 seconds. And I'm just going to put a little bit, just a little of that. Now, let's give it a try. It's pretty good. I feel like the potatoes are too hot to really get a good sense of the flavor. So maybe I'll let it sit for just a half a minute to get a so I can taste the flavors and not just the temperature or heat. All right, I'm gonna try again. That's a good flavor. And the sauce itself, it does have a little bit of heat to it, but I wouldn't say that it's any hotter than just a store-bought Frank's sauce. At least at this point, from what I can tell. I'm going to taste a little bit of sweetness, and that could be from the peppers, or more than likely it's coming from those stewed tomatoes. I'm thinking that's where the sweetness is coming from. But the sauce has a great, great flavor to it. I have too in my notes when I made this using primarily ghost peppers, that it had a great flavor, but you could feel that burn from the peppers towards the end of your bite, as you're chewing the food up. And as you're done with that chew or whatever and swallowing the food, you could taste the heat for sure at the end. That I'm not getting that with this. It's just mildly hot, but it has a really good flavor. I feel like adding the stewed tomatoes kind of gave it a little bit of extra flavor depth. Just trying to compare it back to when I made it before with the sugar rush peppers. All in all, I'm happy with it. This will last me for a little while, but probably not real long. And I'm hoping that next year I get more hot peppers. The pepper crop overall this year wasn't great. I can't really say that many of my veggies did very well this year, except for watermelons, and they're a fruit. But surprisingly, it was just that kind of a year. So I hope that you found this helpful. Let me know if you try this recipe, or I would love to know what your favorite recipe is for hot sauce. And please do check out the website where this recipe came from, chilipeppermadness.com. That website is not just recipes, although it does have a lot of recipes. It's a total wealth of information about peppers in general and growing peppers, a lot of helpful information there. So check that out. And I hope that you'll tune back in next time when it will be likely another recipe video, because I'm kind of on this fall cooking kick. And I am going to share with you guys my favorite recipe using sweet potatoes, which I did not grow this year, I have in years past. It doesn't matter. This is a great recipe. I've used it for at least a decade. It's our go-to sweet potato recipe for our Thanksgiving meal. So tune back in for that. Thank you as always for hanging out with me. I do hope that you enjoyed this little cooking session, and I hope that you tune back in for that sweet potato recipe. And until next time, take care.